Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for tuning into this solo episode, which is going to be a whole masterclass in calorie and macro tracking. The first time I recorded an episode of this nature was a few years ago. It was episode 17. And ever since, I've recorded a couple more episodes on how to track your calories and macros. In the last few years, I have gained a lot of experience helping clients learn how to do it consistently and accurately enough in order to see results. And that's exactly what I aim to do today. I am going to pour all of the knowledge that I have gained since that initial episode way back in 2022, episode 17, into this episode for all of you, dear listeners. Let's start with how to approach calorie and macro tracking from a mindset perspective. First of all, nothing that you track and eat or drink is bad. It's just information. And tracking isn't a tool for restriction, as some people may perceive it. Think of it as a tool to raise awareness around your current eating habits, which are neither good nor bad, but they may be more or less aligned with your current fitness goals. And a calorie and macro tracking app is an excellent tool to show you how close those habits are to your goal or how far away, so that you can actually make adjustments in order to achieve the goal that you want to achieve. The third point I want to cover in this section on mindset is the answer to the question, which one is more important, to be consistent or to be accurate? While they're both important, ultimately, it's more realistic to achieve 100% consistency than 100% accuracy. In fact, calories themselves as a unit of measurement are only an estimate. They're the best estimate that we have of the energy contained within the food that we eat. And even food manufacturers are allowed to be inaccurate by about 20% on the nutritional label of the foods that you purchase, at least in the UK and in the United States. And even though there is this degree of inaccuracy, tracking calories still works, clearly, because people use it and they achieve their goals. So we don't need to be, and we are unlikely to always be 100% accurate. We do need some accuracy, however. We can't just eyeball the food that we are eating, because if it were that easy, then everybody would easily achieve their nutritional goals and they wouldn't need the tool of calorie and macro tracking. So ultimately, consistency is more important unless you are stranded in the middle of nowhere and your phone breaks or there is no internet. You should have access to a calorie and macro tracking app. And when you gain enough knowledge, even without your phone, you will be able to do it mentally. On the other hand, we can't expect a degree of accuracy all the time. And in fact, accuracy is context dependent, in that if you are at home, you have your food scale, you're in your own environment, then there is really no excuse not to be as accurate as possible, weighing every single ingredient, following all of the tips that I'm going to give you in this podcast, and so on. But if you're at a restaurant, you're not going to bring your scale to the restaurant. Or if you're on holiday, similarly, you probably won't bring your scale with you. So we need to accept a lower degree of accuracy. And that's where maintaining consistency will enable you to get close enough to your goals to continue seeing progress. But also, it's important to mention that calorie and macro tracking is only a tool. So if you are tracking your calories and your macros and you're not seeing results, it's not always because you're not good enough at tracking. In many cases, it is. In fact, it's my first solution when a client is stuck. Rather than slashing their calories if they are in a fat loss phase, I will ask them first to review how accurately and consistently they are tracking their calories and macros compared to when they were seeing results. Because more often than not, people lose their initial drive to track calories and macros, or they get busier, or they get a little bit ambitious and they think they can eyeball accurately because they've been doing it for a while. So they become less and less accurate over time than when they started. And that's how they can get into a plateau. So sometimes, yes, it is the usage of the tool that we need to change in order to get unstuck, to overcome a plateau. But you also have to ask yourself whether you are actually making fat loss friendly choices, if the goal is fat loss, or calorie controlled choices, irrespective of whether you want to lose fat, maintain your current body fat stores, or be in a surplus. If you're not getting the results that you want, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm actually putting on my plate? Because calorie and macro tracking is only a tool to show you what it is that you're putting in your body. But just like you can achieve your goals by tracking, and in many cases this makes it easier for a lot of people, you can also achieve those goals without tracking by making the right food choices. And that's important for me to mention because I emphasize with all of my clients that we don't want to rely on your calorie and macro tracking app as a crutch. It's supposed to be a tool to help you achieve a goal that you wouldn't be able to achieve without tracking. But if you take tracking away and you have no idea how to put together a balanced meal that hits your goals, we have a problem. You're not actually learning how to change your nutritional habits. So far, you've only just learned how to rely on a calorie tracking app. That is my piece on mindset. So I'm now going to move into what kind of calorie and macro tracking app to choose. The one I typically recommend is MyFitnessPal. And just so you know, I will be mentioning the names of these apps, but I'm not affiliated with any of them. If I were, I would tell you. I typically recommend MyFitnessPal because its biggest pro is that it has probably the largest food database of any calorie and macro tracking app that I'm aware of, simply because it's been around the longest. Having said that, there are some downsides to that, in that it is a very large database, but it's because every user can create an entry, and many of these entries are incorrect or they are outdated. In addition to that, unfortunately, the barcode scanner function is no longer free. And that was a really useful tool to track on the fly by simply scanning the barcode of the product that you were going to eat. At the end of the day, however, all of the calorie and macro tracking apps available are very similar. So, what I would consider is where you live and how you intend on tracking. For example, personally, I don't use MyFitnessPal. I use an app called My Macros Plus, and it works really, really well for me because of the way that I track. I don't rely on pre existing entries. Whenever I buy a product, I create my own entry. Or if I don't have the label available, for example, if it's just some produce that I bought from the store, like a punnet of strawberries, then I will create an entry using the national database of where I'm based, which is right now the UK. And I'm going to teach you how to do that later in this podcast. Now, because I take the time to create all of my own entries, what I love about my Macros Plus is that if you add the macronutrients first, so the carbs, the protein, and the fat, my Macros Plus will work out the total calories that these macros amount to. because the calories in the food that we eat come from these three macronutrients. Each gram of protein and carbs contain 4 calories, and each gram of fats contains 9 calories. So when you're looking at a food label, you will typically see the total calories per serving at the top, and those come from adding up the calories contained in each gram of protein, carbs, and fats contained in that serving. So if, for example, a product had 100 calories listed on the label and it said 12.5 grams of protein and 12.5 grams of carbs, what you would do in order to calculate those 100 calories would be 12.5 plus 12.5, that's 25. I'm gonna add them together because there is the same number of calories in protein and in carbs. It's 4 calories per gram. So I'm gonna add those up. I've got 25 grams total. I multiply that by 4 and I'm gonna get 100. The app My Macros Plus does that for me. And what's that really useful for is for me to check how close that calculation comes to the original label that I'm looking at, which is especially useful for American users because due to some manufacturing rules around the nutritional labels, often the nutritional labels of American foods and beverages underestimate the total calories per serving by quite a bit. There are quite a few loopholes for manufacturers to state that the calories per serving of a certain food are lower than what they actually are, which is unfortunate and quite annoying. But an app like My Macros Plus will pick up on that because if you create your own entries and you add the macros first, you will see that the My Macros Plus app will work out the total calories and you will notice that they are higher than the calories on your label. So you can rely on what My Macros Plus is telling you instead of relying on the original label and thus increase your accuracy. Having said that, not everybody is going to want to take the time to create their own individual entries. Some people may need to rely on the barcode scanner function. I have clients who tell me that function is my lifesaver because I'm too busy to log my own food otherwise. In that case, you have to consider that if you look at an app like MyFitnessPal, that barcode scanner function is behind a paywall. And as far as I know, the app Macros First is essentially a carbon copy of MyFitnessPal, but the barcode scanner feature is still free, at least as of September 11th, 2025, which is the date I'm recording this podcast. So ultimately, you have to think about what kind of food logger you are, whether you create your own entries or whether you rely on the existing database. And if you rely on the existing database, then an app like with a bigger database like MyFitnessPal would probably be better. Whereas if you create your own entries, even an app like My Macros Plus, which doesn't have the best UK database, it's a little bit better in terms of the American database, since it's an American app originally, then that could be a good choice for you because you don't care about the database if you create your own entries. In any case, most of them do have very similar features. Some of them are behind a paywall, some of them are not. So I would look into the features that best serve you and your own budget, and then pick an app, learn how to use it really, really well, and then be consistent with that. And I wouldn't worry about it beyond that. Now that you've chosen an app, we are going to talk about how to track your calories and macros at home and when you're away, because these two environments will require different degrees of flexibility, circling back to the conversation we've just had around accuracy and how it changes depending on the context. I'm going to start with sharing some tips on tracking your calories and macros at home, where you have everything under your control. First of all, I highly recommend that under all circumstances, whenever possible, you use your food tracking app as a planner for the future, not a diary of the past. That gives you the greatest chance to hit your calories and macro targets. In an ideal world, the best option would be to pre-plan every meal and snack the day before or the morning of for the entire day. But not everybody has that kind of time. So the second most ideal option would be to pre-plan at least your very last meal or snack of the day, and you can track the rest on the fly. But if you at least pre-track the final meal, then you can make sure that it fits within the calories and macros that you have left for the day. The third most ideal option would be to log the food right before you put it into your mouth, because once you've eaten it, you cannot do anything about it. But if you at least log it right before you eat it, you can still make a choice about the portion size. So if you realize that the donut you're about to bite into has 600 calories instead of the 400 that you expected, you can still choose to have just half of it and leave the other half for another day. If you have the ability to pre-plan your meals and your snacks, a simple way to do this would be to divide your calories somewhat equally across your chosen number of meals for the day. For example, easy math. If you have 1500 total calories for the day and you want to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's 500 calories per meal. If you are somebody who enjoys snacking, then you could have a fixed amount of calories per meal and then a different potential budget for snacks. For example, you could say, okay, I'm eating 1800 calories, so 500 for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and 300 calories for all of my snacks. I would also divide your protein targets into the meals and snacks that you want to have. I would not have less than 20 grams of protein in too many meals of snacks or snacks. If you have one meal that's a bit lower in protein, that's not a big deal. But generally, in at least 2 to 3 protein servings per day, so protein containing meals or snacks per day, I would err on the side of having at least 20 grams plus, especially if you are an older person. The older we get, the more anabolic resistance we develop, meaning we need a greater serving of protein to do the same job that a smaller serving used to do. So the older you get, and especially above 50 years of age, you want to start erring on the side of having greater protein servings, which doesn't necessarily mean you need more total protein per day, but it means that when you do have protein, you want to make sure that it's at least 20, 25, 30 grams, and even higher depending on how old you actually are, with the older meaning the greater the amount. So, for example, if your target is 100 grams and you could get away with 20 grams 5 times a day when you were in your 20s and now you're in your 60s, it would actually be a little bit better if you had 2 meals with 50 grams of protein each. Now, circling back to planning, my most successful clients are those that have the ability and the willingness to plan their food in advance. And when you're actually logging your food into the app, I would start by logging your priorities. And for most of my clients, the priorities are protein and fiber. So when you are pre-logging your food, I would pre-log your protein source in any particular meal, followed by your fruit or your vegetables for that meal, followed by your starchy carbohydrates that contain fiber, and then the rest. So that even mentally, you are creating a habit of paying attention to these nutritional priorities. Now, my most successful clients not only plan in advance, but they also tend to create a meal structure for themselves, which means that to an extent, they eat similar meals every day. They don't have to be the exact same meals, but they are going to be very similar in the way that they are structured. So there's always going to be a protein source, usually a lean protein source, but it depends really on their calorie budget and their specific nutritional phase. I realized that so far I tend to lean towards speaking in terms of fat loss in this episode, but that's only because a lot of people have a fat loss goal, and it's also the smallest calorie budget you'll ever have. A deficit, that is the smallest calorie budget you'll ever have. So it makes sense to talk about it in terms of engineering your diet around that, because it then sets you up to be able to also hit your maintenance calories or a surplus, given that these are higher calorie budgets. Anyway, the meal structure typically involves a lean protein source, a high fiber starchy carbohydrates, a serving of fruit or vegetables, and then, if there are enough calories left, extra flavor that contains calories, such as a sauce or a condiment, and or an additional fat source. This is an excellent structure that enables you to have a lot of flexibility, but also gives you parameters to stay within. Because based on this structure, you're not going to have rice and potatoes in the same meal, because that would be two sources of starchy carbohydrates, and the structure only includes one. So this enables you to get the nutrients that you need while keeping the diet calorie controlled. Of course, there are certain dietary choices that will force you into having more carbs or more than one source of starchy carbs in the same meal. For example, if you are vegan, the majority of vegan protein sources also contain carbohydrates, and sometimes not just carbohydrates, but also fats. They are composite foods. So, of course, if you are vegan, you are going to need to have rice and beans in the same meal, for example, because the beans, yes, do contain carbs, but they also contain protein. And rice and beans are actually very compatible because as protein sources, because rice contains certain amino acids that the beans are lacking, and vice versa. So there are circumstances under which these rules don't necessarily apply as well, but as a general rule, having a structure where each macronutrient corresponds to a single food choice, so one food source for your carbs, one for your protein, one for your fats, and then a separate serving of fruit or vegetables, enables you to keep your calories under control and also tends to tip you towards having more whole, less processed foods, which are more health promoting. Because apart from vegan sources, which can definitely be health promoting, and they are very processed to make them digestible to us because they're plant sources and plants are harder for us to digest typically. The vast majority of composite foods are more processed and highly palatable and also more nutrient poor, like French fries, cookies, cake, and I'm sure you can imagine all of the other foods that I am referring to. So, having this structure enables you to plan your day to achieve your nutritional targets, but it also helps you lean towards a less processed and more health promoting diet. When it comes to creating a structure for your snacks, I usually suggest to go with two of these categories that I've listed. So, normally, if you're a bit low on protein, I suggest that your snacks contain a source of protein, and then it could be a fruit or a piece of vegetable, or it could be protein and fat, it could be carbs and fats, it could be protein and carbs. The specifics will depend on your needs at the time. For example, an endurance athlete might have carbs and fruit in the same snack in order to get enough carbohydrates and sugar to perform well in their next training session. Most people are not endurance athletes that perform at that level and need that kind of carbohydrate intake. So the majority of my clients will go for protein plus a fruit or a veg. So that's what I would recommend as a general rule for a lot of the people who are going to listen to this podcast. Now, moving on, my next suggestion is to track every day. Sometimes I get clients who have a bit of a perfectionistic mindset around tracking, and they only want to track when they have perfect days where they made a plan that fit their macros and calories and they stuck to it. But if you only track perfect days, then you will have no idea about what you ate on the less perfect days. And if you have more imperfect days than perfect days, which is realistically the case for most people, this will make it impossible for you to reach your goals. It's far more important to be imperfectly consistent than to be sporadically perfect. My next suggestion is to bear in mind that all of the tips that I've shared so far and will continue to share are just that, tips. They're not rules. At the end of the day, circling back to the importance of consistency, any tracking is better than no tracking. So don't get discouraged if you don't track everything perfectly to the gram all of the time. However, you are at home right now. We are discussing how to track when you are at home. So you are able to track very accurately most of the time. And my next suggestion would be to weigh out each ingredient that you're going to add to any meal or snack and add it to your food log separately. For example, I would not log a meal as rice curry. I would log 60 grams of Tesco white rice uncooked, 115 grams of Tesco fresh salmon fillet, 100 grams of tomatoes, 50 grams of lettuce, and 15 milliliters of Amoy dark soy sauce. So based on the list I've just given you, which is just a random example, you can see I'm logging each ingredient separately. I am logging it in grams. This is very important. Use grams, ounces, milliliters, or fluid ounces. Do not use cups and tablespoons because these are units of volume and they are way less accurate. In addition to that, whenever possible, you are logging the specific brand of the food that you are eating so that you can use the nutritional label relative to that specific product. And you are choosing whether to log a food as raw or cooked. My preference would be to weigh all of your food and log it as uncooked or raw, whether that's rice, pasta, a salmon fillet, a chicken breast, doesn't matter. Because on most labels, the nutritional facts are relative to the uncooked or raw serving. Having said that, if you are in a situation where you need to weigh it and log it cooked, then you would have to look for an entry on the calorie tracking app you're using that specifically states cooked. And ideally, it would state cooked in the way that you are cooking it. So if you're grilling it, it would say chicken breast grilled. Because when you cook food, depending on the cooking method and the specific food, the nutritional facts are going to change because the weight of the item is going to change. For example, uncooked chicken breast is going to weigh more than cooked chicken breast in most cases because chicken breast loses water in the cooking process. So once you've cooked your 150 grams of raw chicken breast, it's probably going to weigh around 20 to 25% less, but it is going to contain the same calories and macros, even in that smaller portion, because it's not like you got rid of the protein, you just got rid of the water. That's why it's important that you pick whether you're logging the food as raw or cooked. You pick the nutritional facts that correspond to whether the item was weighed, cooked, or raw. And once you've chosen how to do it, stick with it all of the time. So if you're always weighing your chicken breast after cooking it, then stick with cooked entries. I do recommend using the raw entries, however. And if you do use the cooked entries, make sure to log any condiments used in the cooking process that contain calories, like oils or butter, separately. Speaking of which, I know that less solid food, like oil, butter, yogurt, peanut butter, other spreads, can be a bitch to weigh out if you just take the usual approach. My recommendation is to take the jar or the container of that specific food, put it on your scale, and click on a button called Tare, Tare. When you do that, the weight of the item on the scale will go to 0, meaning that now your container has been taken into account by the scale. So if you spoon out or use a knife to get out the portion that you want, the number on the scale is going to change to a number with a minus at the start. So if you spoon out some peanut butter, it might say minus 15. That's the amount in grams in this case, but it could be ounces if you use ounces. That's the amount that's on your spoon right now after you've pressed the Tare button. That's the amount that you're going to log in your calorie tracking app. This is the key to accurately logging these foods, because I highly advise against using tablespoons. Whenever you log a tablespoon on a calorie tracking app, that's typically a non-heaped tablespoon. Most people have at least a little bit of a heap on top of their spoon when they weigh anything. So it's very unlikely you're going to get it exactly right. And unfortunately, these foods that are a little bit of a bitch to weigh also tend to contain a really high amount of calories. We're talking 900 calories per 100 mils of oil, 600 calories per 100 grams of peanut butter. So if you get a tablespoon of oil, that's only 15 mils and it's 120 calories. You get a tablespoon of peanut butter, that's 90 calories. Clearly, you can see how a difference of a few grams could be a difference of 50, 100 calories, which all add up and will lead to a plateau if you're not careful enough. Now, having said all this, if you are in a pinch or if you have certain foods that are already pre-portioned, you can use the stated serving on the nutritional label. For example, if you have a bag of bagels and the nutritional label says 1 bagel equals 200 calories, would it be even more accurate to weigh the bagels? Yes. What I like to do is I weigh the bagels and then like as a whole, and then I divide the total number by the number of bagels. So if I have 5 bagels and I weigh them and the total weight is 500 grams, that's 100 grams per bagel. So then I don't need to weigh every single bagel, I just log every one as 100. In any case, if you're not willing or able to do that, because again, you're in a pinch, just log 1 bagel as 200 calories following the nutritional label. Now, as I hinted at earlier, there are foods that have no calories on the label, such as produce, strawberries, I can't think of any vegetables right now, fennel, courgette, or zucchini if you're American. These foods don't usually have calories on the label. In this case, you can find the nutritional facts depending on the country that you are in, because on MyFitnessPal, for example, there are a lot of entries that come straight from the database of at least the US, Australia, and the UK. So if you are in the US and you want to log 100 grams of carrots, you can look up carrots followed by the term USDA, because the USDA is the United States Department of Agriculture, which is in charge of creating the food database of all foods and all of their calories and macros. So you will come up with results that should say carrots raw, and instead of the brand, it should say USDA. And that should be the most up-to-date and most accurate nutritional information for that specific food. If you are in Australia, instead of USDA, you can look up NUTTAB, NUTTAB. If you are in the UK, you can look up COFID, COFID. If you are in any other country, you can Google the nutritional database for your own country, and it should come up if your country has one, which most do. Next suggestion, make sure to include every ingredient in every meal and snack in your logging, whether it's a food or a drink. If you're not sure if it contains calories or not, Google it. If it doesn't contain calories, you don't need to log it. Don't worry about it. But a lot of people don't think about the fact that alcohol has calories, sauces have calories, dressings, condiments, etc. And obviously, these all add up if you don't add them in. These are my suggestions for when you're eating at home, you have everything under control, and you can be very accurate. So, the next suggestions are going to apply whether you're eating at a restaurant, going on holiday, or eating food that somebody else made for you. When it comes to eating at a restaurant, in the UK and in America, but also in many other countries, maybe to a lesser extent, many restaurants tend to publish the nutritional content of their food on their website. So you can simply look this up. Sometimes they will have the calories as well as the macros. Sometimes they only have the calories. If they only have the calories, I would ensure that you're making food choices that you know will be aligned with your goals. For example, if you know that you still need a protein source in that particular day, then you will want to have a protein source featured in the restaurant meal. But I wouldn't worry about hitting specific numbers in your calorie tracking app because you don't have that information on the restaurant website. So you can simply log the calories and know that you chose an entree with chicken breast. And if you had enough protein the rest of the day, realistically, you'll be in the ballpark of what your goal needs to be, or rather, what your target is. This obviously is the easiest option, but not every single restaurant has nutritional information available. Or if you're eating dinner that your friend made, they don't have the nutritional information available unless you ask it of them, which is always an option. And I would not underestimate how helpful your friends can be and how on board with with your fitness goals they might be if you were communicative of them. And just recently I recorded a podcast with Joe Spector on the importance of communication and boundary setting, and that was episode 161, which I strongly recommend that you give a listen to after this one. Anyway, assuming you do not have the calories and macros available, we have a few options that we can use instead. First off, there are some circumstances when it's going to make more sense to track the meal as a whole meal, such as chicken noodle ramen soup, instead of trying to painstakingly log every single ingredient. There are other circumstances when it's possible and may make more sense to log every single ingredient. For example, if you go to a buffet where you have different dishes, and for example, you get a little bit of a grilled chicken breast for one tray. From another tray, you get a bread roll. And from another tray, you get a serving of cooked vegetables. Then you could log these separately instead. Now, once you've made the choice on whether you're going to log the entire meal or ingredient by ingredient, what you can do is find an item, for example, from a supermarket or another restaurant, that somewhat closely matches the food that you are eating. So, for example, if you are going to a place, an Asian restaurant, and you're in the UK, and it's a ramen dish, Wagamama is a chain restaurant that provides calories on the menu. And let's say that you're having a grilled chicken ramen, you can use the calories and macros from the grilled chicken ramen from Wagamama and simply log it as a whole meal and copy those calories and those macros. Or if you're having a dessert, let's say you're having a slice of cheesecake and it's a New York vanilla cheesecake, New York style vanilla cheesecake. You don't have the calories and the macros, but you know of a restaurant which does have calories and macros and does offer the same dessert. You can copy that. Or any supermarket chain available to you sells the same thing at the store. Use the calories and macros that you can find on their website. You don't have to just stick to restaurants, you can use supermarkets as well. Now, if this also is not possible, what you can do is use ChatGPT or any AI of choice. And my recommendation is to take a clear picture of the food. Sometimes two is even better, one from the top and one from the front, I suppose, from a different perspective, so you can see the AI can see the thickness of the food. And also importantly, give the AI a reference for the size. What I like to do is use my fist. I put my fist next to the plate, I take a picture of the plate, and I upload it to the AI, and I ask it to estimate the calories and macros based on my fist. But you can also use a water bottle, you can use a plate, whatever you have handy, pun intended. When you give this picture to the AI, be as specific as possible. Copy all of the ingredients listed on the menu, as well as the name of the entree, and paste it into the chat with the AI. The more information you can give it, the more accurate the estimation is going to be. Now, because we're already guesstimating, so there is a degree of inaccuracy already built into this, which we're going to accept, we're going to try to minimize this margin of error. And when ChatGPT gives you its estimate, it typically gives you a range of calories and macros. I would err on the side of the greater amount of calories that it gives you. So if it tells you that that meal is likely between 4 and 600 calories, I would certainly log 600 calories. If you are not using ChatGPT and you are guesstimating your calories using another of the methods I've talked about so far, I would add 20% to your guesstimation because research has found that restaurant entrees which do have the calories available can be inaccurate in their labeling by 20 to 30%. So if the existing calorie information can be that inaccurate, the information that you're going to come up with is also going to be likely just as inaccurate, if not more. So I would take your guesstimation, let's say it's 600 calories, I would multiply that by zero point 0.2, which is 20%, and whatever amount you get, you add it as extra calories. For example, in MyFitnessPal, there's a function called quick add calories. And if you click on that, you can just add a number of calories. So if you get 20% of 600, which is 120 calories, you're going to log that total meal as 720 calories so that you err on the side of overestimating instead of underestimating. The last option, which is my least favorite because it has the highest degree of error here, is to rely on the database within your calorie and macro tracking app. This contains a gazillion entries, especially if you choose MyFitnessPal and you try to look up chicken ramen noodle soup, you're going to be scrolling endlessly. So I would recommend that you scroll through a few of them. You get a good idea of the range of calories that they offer. For example, for this particular dish, it could be anywhere from 400 to 800. And then you err on the side of overestimating. So if you are at a restaurant, log 800 calories. But also use a little bit of common sense. Like if you're having a teeny tiny bowl of chicken ramen and you know that realistically if you were to log 800 calories you'd be severely overestimating. We also don't want to get to the point where we're starving ourselves, so maybe if the range is 400 to 800 and your bowl is smaller than a typical bowl of food, then I would log it as 600 calories instead, so I would knock off a couple hundred calories. However, most people struggle with overeating rather than undereating, so for most people, it's more realistic and more helpful to think about overestimating instead of underestimating, especially in the context where you're eating out or you're eating food that you didn't make yourself. If you are choosing to track every single ingredient, like with the buffet option that I gave you earlier, it is super helpful to use your fists for carbs and protein, and your thumbs for condiments and fat sources, and then provide an AI like ChatGPT with relevant pictures. Or also, if you don't have the pictures, you could simply say, I had a thumb worth of this particular sauce, which typically equates to 15 mils, and I had 2 fists of this baked potato. And because there is a standard whereby a fist of a certain food corresponds to a certain quantity of that food in grams, which ChatGPT, to my knowledge, has stored in its database. It is aware that this standard exists. It will be able to tell you, okay, a typical fist of this baked potato is this many calories and macros. So that's how you can also use your hands in order to quantify your portions. And with that, I believe I have covered calorie and macro tracking from every possible angle. I think this masterclass will give you all of the tools that you need in order to hone the skill of calorie and macro tracking, and in order to approach it with the right mindset, whereby you acknowledge that you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be consistent. You don't want to use calorie and macro tracking as a crutch. You want to use it to raise awareness and to learn to make choices that are more aligned with your goals and with the principles of healthy and balanced eating. And you understand that when you have more variables under your control, you can be more accurate. And when you don't have as many variables under your control, there is still a lot that you can do in order to stay on top of your goals, as long as you accept a certain degree of inaccuracy. And you don't go insane over the fact that you cannot be perfect with tracking that food. At the end of the day, if your accuracy isn't high enough, you will notice because you're going to hit a plateau. So that's when you can review your current approach to tracking and maybe implement some more buffers to make sure that you're not inadvertently underestimating too much. So if you hit a plateau and currently you're not adding 20% of extra calories when you eat out, maybe you start doing that. Or if you are logging your peanut butter in tablespoons, maybe you start weighing it in grams using the tare function on your scale. So I wouldn't be afraid of being too inaccurate, because the data will tell you if you are too inaccurate. If you are seeing results and you know you're not 100% accurate, you don't need to change anything because you're seeing results. That's why consistency is far more important, because if you're consistent, you can always see what it is that you're doing because you're logging it, and you can make changes to it based on whether it's working or not. And on that note, thank you so much for listening. If you want to work with me, you can apply via the link in my bio. I am currently taking on clients for my one-on-one coaching service. I also offer one-off consultations. I offer custom programs without any coaching. So I try to tailor my services and products to different budgets. And if you have the time, it would be super helpful if you could leave a 5-star rating on any audio platform that you're using to listen. And if you are on a platform that enables you to leave written reviews and you want to leave a comment or a review, I would absolutely love to read it. And I respond to every single one of them. Sometimes not super timely, just because I'm still learning, even after all these years, to find the notifications. They're not easy to find, believe it or not, that I did get a review or a comment. But whenever I become aware of one, I always reply, and I am very thankful for every single comment and rating and review that I get. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.